Welcome to the Artist Work Ethic Podcast. I'm Mike Pelak. I'm an actor, screenwriter, and filmmaker who's always looking to maximize my time and potential as I work to break in. In this podcast, I talk to artists of all kinds who have seen success in their fields about their process, habits, and work ethic. Today on the show is Ben Green. Ben's a musician and producer best known as guitar player for the band Fairweather. Fairweather recently released a new EP called Deluge on Equal Vision Records, their first new music since 2014. Fairweather has toured with bands such as Thursday, Brand New, Saves the Day. Ben also runs a recording studio in Washington, D.C. called Ivakota. A couple quick things before we jump into the episode. I've talked in the past about myself working on breaking into screenwriting. Please check out blackoilfilms.com/screenwriting. There you can check out some of the screenplays I've written. I have the first 10 pages of each one uploaded, but feel free to email me at theartistsworkethicpodcast@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to send you a full script if you're interested in reading. The script I want to highlight today is a feature drama called I Know You. I Know You is about when a man discovers that he can know details about those around him and uses his ability to improve his life at the cost of his own personal morality. Last thing before we get into the episode, I would love anyone listening to subscribe, rate, and review the Artist's Work Ethic Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps us put the show out there for more people to listen to. All right, Ben, thank you for coming on with me today.
No problem. Happy to be here.
So you've had success with both Fairweather and now as a producer, engineer, and studio owner with, is it Ivakota? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. In DC. What's a common thread in your work ethic that has elevated all of these things?
You know, I think like with the band, it's a little hard to say what the ethic is kind of consistently over the past 20 some years. And in some ways it all kind of feels like it's been an accident, that anybody ever really cared about the music, because when we started playing, we hadn't really done all that much work before there was some attention, like from, funnily enough, like at the time, our favorite record label who we've worked with for like 20 some years, Equal Vision. And we just had a mutual connection from a local show promoter. It's weird. I think with punk music, well, not just punk music, but a lot of organic music culture scenes, it just accidentally occurs. It's just something that people do because that's what you do with your friends. That's what you do with your community. And it's something that's not really connected to business, in any particular way. I would say that some of the stuff that we did early on was counter to smart business choices. And I think for better or for worse, we made the music that we really wanted to, and really didn't really compromise on much of the stuff at all. Some of it, is a little funny to listen to now, 20 some years later, but the music was really about, let's try to make things the way that we want to, make them not smart, in terms of calculating, not strategic. We're not strategic in any way whatsoever. It's very much about making the stuff that we wanted to make and challenging ourselves, and in some ways trying to challenge the people that liked our music. I think that stayed somewhat true to us through every release, every recording we've ever done. Hard to say if that's helped us or hurt us. Probably hurt us, but
So maybe it's not directly work ethic related, but I think a big piece of the puzzle is that you put yourself out there, and that's really a first step in allowing things to happen.
Yeah, and I think the desire to work, we wanted to be busy. We wanted to be playing. The whole thing was being in front of people, right? Like that was the entire point of the music we were making, was to connect with a live audience. The recorded stuff has taken much more of a prevalence in the way that we view ourselves over time. But at the beginning, through much of our busy time, it was the whole point was to be playing shows in front of a crowd. And the recording was really like, here's what you will maybe get at a show, with some extra bells and whistles. But the desire to work and the ability to say to yourself, and this is the thing with punk hardcore music, so much of it is like a recognition that culture isn't given to you. Like you don't walk into stuff. You kind of have to form it. And so, we did come up in a music scene that was very much, let's just do the stuff ourselves. Let's just put on the shows ourselves. The big shows that we started playing were all independent, like venues, like churches, VFW halls, community spaces. I mean, DC just has such a long history of that. So that infrastructure was kind of lucky that it was already there. But that's the thing about many of these organic cultures. They just sometimes have infrastructure, or you have people who are working to create the culture themselves. And I think knowing that you can't necessarily walk into a culture and you have to kind of do some work to make it happen is something that we benefited from greatly in the town that we live in.
Totally. And I mean, going off of that, I've talked a bunch about how DIY and punk rock have really influenced my work ethic. And, just from that base level of knowing that I could do something if I just go and do it, I've just got to get it done. How would you say punk rock and DIY have informed your work ethic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it sometimes has been an instinct and less of a formalized understanding. The family that I grew up in, like, if it was, we never had a repairman for anything at the house. It was always my parents fixing the stuff, fixing the cars. I grew up working on cars with my dad, and repairing the stuff in our home. There was just this idea of you got to make the things you have last as long as you can. Things can be worked on, they can be fixed. There's just this, I think I grew up with a bit of just an instinct for that idea. And so I think maybe that community attracted me because of that idea also, where it was like, this is just a genuine thing that people have decided that they can make and do. And it's actually not very difficult to rent a space, put on a show, figure out how to screw around and record a record with somebody who has like the minimum viable product of recording ability, and you're making a thing that you care about. And so I think that maybe it was like a back and forth of like some of the instincts that I had as just a person being raised the way that I was, and then seeing this happening in real life and saying, oh, this makes sense to me.
I mean, the same goes with film. I feel like it's kind of, it's like putting on a show, where you've got to get your venue, or, where you're going to film, you've got to get your bands, got to get your actors. It's very similar thing of, what could look like a daunting task it's surmountable.
Yes. And I think too, there's, my wife and I talk about this all the time. We're both very cautious people with like what we agree that we can do, because we don't want to agree to anything outside of our scope of abilities. But so much of like punk hardcore community is like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I think there's value in making this thing happen. So I'm going to just string this together and see if it's a success. And the success is many times just extremely local in terms of time. It's like, oh, well, the show went off without a fire, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was great.
Shut down. Yeah,
exactly. And you have these different conceptions of success than the typical kind of music industry definitions of success, which are non-parochial, non-provincial. They're totally different than what someone who is in a specific town is like trying to do with a community or a place. And that always rang very true to me.
One of the things I like to talk about is goal setting, long-term, short-term. I'm a big list person. How would you say, whether it was with the band 20 years ago or the way you're running your studio now, how are you kind of organizing yourself in like a day, week, month to make sure you're always progressing and staying focused with what you're doing?
I think that this is something that I lack a good bit of in terms of strategy. I am a very literal person. I deal with what's like right in my face, like right in front of me. I don't plan well for long-term goals. It's just not something that I have a strength at. So it's a struggle for me to think about those things down the line and then make calculated moves to get to that. I'm just so not I'm just not prepared for a lot of those things. So much of what I do is like about sustainability and durability. And that's to me what much of the recording, producing ideas are for me, and the way that I've gone about that in DC is attempting to get to a place where I'm not overextended into some foolish, risky endeavor. I want to be able to serve the city I'm in and the community of people here with responsibility and with longevity. I mean, to me, it's about duration. It's about consistency, duration, and less about growth. I'm really not growth focused. It's just not something that I think about. So my advice about stuff like that is probably very poor, to be totally frank with you. I really care about dedication. The people I admire the most are people that stay in a place for a long time and are consistent and do good things for the people through several generations. Like that's the kind of ethic I admire hands down more than anything. And it's sort of hard to maintain that in certain kinds of businesses or cultures like music. Everything is about trajectory. Everything is about growth, next level producing. You know, I live in DC, which is a very tight, scrappy music community. And it's all about so much of the problems are people leaving DC to try to go to other places to either work with bigger fish, bigger clients as producers. There's more clients. You know, I've never been attracted to this kind of perspective as someone who records music. It just doesn't scratch my itch. The same thing could be said for playing music for me. The Fairweather has been on and off for like 20 some years, and we just decide to play music in whatever form we want, whatever makes sense to us. And we haven't really we've gone through periods where we stopped, but we continue to put out records and make creative choices and hang out as friends, and we're all best friends. So that hasn't changed in a long time.
And to that point, you're at the point now with Fairweather where you can just do it the way you want. And if you're not, you know, maybe if you're going back to 2003 and that first record on Equal Vision or whatever year it was, you know, there's a lot more pressure there.
Oh yes.
Than the way that you're able to do it now. And trying to figure out how to word this, you pretty much, that longevity ethic that you laid out is pretty much exactly what you are doing.
Yeah, and I do think that some of that comes with maturity and not being a kid and not being ensnared in, I mean, the time period you're referring to was a wild time to be playing the kind of punk music that we were playing, because, you know, this happens with scenes. This happens with music communities where, again, there's like an accident that happens and it catches on and people identify with it and it means something to people. And the market just springs into action and it tries to harness it and control, you know, this culture, tries to reproduce it and replicate it over and over again. And the kind of pressure that comes along with that, with people that are ensnared in the business side of the stuff, it's really hard. And it really can ruin, you know, it can ruin people. It can make things very difficult. It's potentially corrosive. It's also potentially really good for certain people. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be hearing certain kinds of music if it weren't for some of those distribution mechanisms and the infrastructure to distribute these things at large. So, but it's like a kind of a dialectical thing. You know, these forces are at odds with each other, and they can sometimes lead to a new way of doing things. But the idea of longevity is something that can be crushed under that kind of pressure. And I saw it happen with a lot of music back then. I mean, it really hit us very hard to be playing under such like momentum. You've got to keep up your momentum, keep up your visibility, and went from a music scene that was like, it was really about bands and people putting on shows, and it became much more focused on behind the scenes managers, business, lawyer, this sort of like extra stuff. Not to minimize those things necessarily, but much of it was like latent structure taking precedence over like the people making the music and the people putting the shows on for people to come see.
Sure. How important would you say persistence and perseverance are to a successful work ethic in the arts?
I think it's everything. And I think it's being able to, it's really difficult for creative people to not connect their being with their work, to say, I am my work. I am my thing. My person is also my work. It's really difficult to do that. And so when work becomes less rewarding, work becomes not as successful in whatever way you describe that, it can be pretty shattering for people's personalities and for people's view on what it means to be like a creative person doing the kind of work that they want to do. And it can be in anything, it can be any kind of craft that someone feels like that. And so making the effort to say to yourself, this is an aspect of who I am, and I just make this my practice, and I sort of study my practice as a life goal throughout my life. It puts a little less pressure on the global success that you try to compare yourself to, or whatever it is, whatever kind of pressure that you see at large. It's really tough for people who pay a lot of attention to the exposure of the way social media works. It's a very, very different world than when I grew up. And so thinking about growing up in the climate where people identify their successes or failures with like how well they feel they promoted something on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, when it doesn't happen, it's like change your perspective of success a little bit and become a little bit more localized with what you describe as success so that you can focus a little bit more.
I think it's like take a little bit of the pressure off yourself too,
Yeah.
and enjoy some of the little wins along the way, because
Yes,
even if you don't end up the biggest musician, the biggest actor, director, or writer, you're still going to have wins along the way. And making sure that you recognize them and stop and enjoy them is important. And also not defining yourself by this one piece of your life.
and I'll say that I think there are certain crafts, like music in particular, is a craft that the vocabulary around it is just so counter to the tradition of music. It's just almost purely talked about like a commodity, like a consumable, like a thing you buy. And the vast history of music has been a thing you take part in, or you do with your family, you do with your community, you do with the people around you. It's like dancing, it's just a sort of fundamental human, it's just a trait of being a human. And so the definitions of success that we have in our vocabulary are really like new, and still being understood, still being worked out. And if some of those things are failing, those new business side of music, things are not working out for some people, it can really be sort of debilitating for folks. So yeah, thinking about it in a bit of a more mysterious way, I think, can sometimes lend itself to letting you get outside of the idea of the success of your craft, whether you're a woodworker, whatever it is that you're doing. It's like, I'm in a tradition, like, how do I study and understand this tradition as much as I can and try to do it in whatever way I'm able to.
Awesome. Anything that you want to plug or talk about before we go? Fairweather's got a new EP out, so
yeah, we have an EP that came out clumsily. Came out at the end of June, and it's called Deluge, and it's on Equal Vision. And so you can kind of listen anywhere, and there should be, records and stuff available to check out on Equal Vision, our record label's website. So
awesome. Well, Ben, thank you so much.
Mike, thanks so much, man.
Thank you so much for listening today. Please subscribe to the Artist Work Ethic podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, and please rate and review the show. Follow us on Instagram at The Artist's Work Ethic, and check out theartistsworkethic.com.